This is Cricket and Andrea's EPGov podcast for November 20th.
The Supreme Court was asked to take on a messy interstate case on same-sex adoption. A lesbian mother in Alabama asked the Supreme Court to review a decision made by Alabama's highest court. The latter refused to recognize her parental rights under an adoption granted in Georgia.
Lawyers of the mother assert that the Alabama court has unconstitutionally refused to abide by the full faith and credit clause by not recognizing her parental rights in Alabama.
Then the recent attacks in Paris has raised discussion about the United States admitting Syrian refugees. So far, 24 governors have asked the federal government to block Syrian refugees from entering their states, including Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, and more. The large reason why these governors reject the refugees is out of concern for the lack of proper and accurate background security checks the refugees would have to go through in order to distinguish any suspicious activity regarding terrorism.
Concerns have been raised about whether or not the governors actually have the power to deny refugees entry into their states. This will definitely be an issue of the power of the states versus the federal government. And even if it's found that they don't have the power and that they must open their states to the refugees, hopefully there is not too much resistance and hostility towards the refugees from the American people themselves. Also regarding the Syrian refugees, a bill was passed on Thursday to dramatically increase the screening procedures that refugees must go through in order to enter the United States. It was passed in a vote of 289 to 137, with about 50 Democrats supporting it. The bill's fate in the Senate is currently unknown. They will vote on it sometime after Thanksgiving. President Obama has come out in opposition to the bill, saying that, quote, slamming the door in the face of refugees would betray our deepest values. That's not who we are, and it's not what we're going to do. He said he would veto the bill if it reached his desk. Some who are in favor of resettling the Syrian refugees are drawing on history, pointing out that America's refusal to accept Jewish refugees during the Holocaust is now seen as shameful. We certainly wouldn't want to look back on this moment in history and see it as an opportunity we had but didn't take to help people in need.
2016 presidential candidate Hillary Clinton looks for an advantage on the fight against ISIS. As Secretary of State in 2009 until 2013, Clinton gained experience with developing foreign policy that proves beneficial in her running for the presidency, now more than ever. Clinton calls for a more intense U.S. and allied campaign to smash ISIS. After a major attack, every society faces a choice between fear and resolve, she said. The world's great democracies can't sacrifice our values or turn our backs on those in need, she said. Therefore, we must choose resolve, and we must lead a world to meet this threat. Clinton is said to lay out her counterterrorism strategy in the wake of the Paris attacks. In contrast, Clinton's biggest competition for the Democratic nomination, Bernie Sanders, believes war should be the last resort. He invokes FDR, saying real freedom must include economic security. Therefore, he thinks that in order to combat terrorism, the American economy should be strong. Because of the recent terrorist attacks, foreign policy will play a big role in distinguishing each candidate within the election.
Democrats are not the only ones who have been talking about foreign policy this week. Donald Trump and Ben Carson, the two frontrunners for the Republican nomination, have both come under fire for their comments about American Muslims and Syrian refugees. Trump declared his support for requiring all Muslims in America to register into a database. When asked how this would be different from Jews having to register in Nazi Germany, he had no response. He also did not reject the idea of Muslims having to carry some sort of identification that indicated their religion. This came shortly after he made calls to close and carefully monitor some mosques. Fortunately, many other politicians, both Democrats and Republicans, have criticized and distanced themselves from Trump's comments because, in the words of Republican primary candidate Jeb Bush, quote, that's just wrong, unquote. Ben Carson, while calling for stricter screening of Syrian refugees, said, quote, if there is a rabid dog running around your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog. And you're probably going to put your children out of the way, clearly comparing Syrian refugees to rabid dogs. Muslim and even some Christian groups have not hesitated to call out Carson on his comments. He has a history of being criticized for comments about Muslims, as in the past, he has said that he does not believe a Muslim should ever be president of the United States.
The opinion editorial we feature this week is titled, Is Any Place Safe? by New York Times op-ed contributor Abdallah Tayi, published November 18, 2015. Tayi shares his personal concerns about the terrorist attacks in Paris and what they may signify for the future of not only Paris, but as well as the global community. It is an interesting perspective because Tayi offers his sincere insight and exposes his raw emotions. Therefore, we highly recommend you give it a read.
The editorial does a very good job capturing the fear that's being felt not only in Paris but also worldwide in the wake of these attacks. While Paris has been given by far the most media attention, those were not the only attacks that weekend. Over 40 people were killed in a deadly bombing in Beirut, Lebanon, just the day before. On the same Friday as the Paris attacks, a funeral in Baghdad, Iraq, was bombed, killing 18. ISIS has been conducting terrorist attacks in the Middle East for quite a long time, and the vast majority of its victims are Muslims. The Paris attacks are simply the West's first and hopefully last experience with ISIS's terrorism, which is why it's come as such a huge shock, and part of the reason why it's dominating the media so much. However, it's important to remember that while we honor the victims of Paris, we must also honor the countless other victims of ISIS's brutality that do not live in Western countries and that are not reported on as much as the Paris attacks have been. As the editorial points out, it really is a worldwide fear of terrorism that is being experienced right now.
And because of its prominence in newspapers all over the world, this is media's job to set the agenda. Our local issue. Culver City High School students are not signing themselves up for Centaur Plus, the campus's designated self-help period that takes place on Mondays and Thursdays of every week. This same carelessness and apathy is seen when the time to vote comes around. So, Cricket, do you think because these students are the future, it is reasonable to conclude that they will have the same habits when it is time to vote?
I don't know how strong of a relationship there is between signing up for Centaur Plus and political involvement. I think it's reasonable to assume that if someone doesn't care about school or about their education, they're probably not going to be the most politically involved citizen. Or I'm not sure how that relates to Centaur Plus, however, because someone can be really invested in their education and just forget to sign up for Centaur Plus. And another person could really just not care about school, but sign up every week for Centaur Plus because they don't want detention. However, no matter the relationship between taking the initiative to sign up for Centaur Plus on time and taking the initiative to vote, it is important to note that the way that the administration has successfully gotten more people to sign up on time is by just reminding students over and over, by repeating it and giving people the opportunity to do it right in class when the reminder comes on. That might mean that applying the same techniques to voting and registering people to vote, simply talking about it a lot and reminding people and providing easy ways for people to do it, might increase voter turnout.